I'm Aaron Meyer with co-host The Chucker. This is the 19-9 Podcast. On today's episode, we have Jerry Tipton. He's been Kentucky basketball's beat writer for 41 years and takes us behind the scenes like few people can.
I don't know if you remember Street Smith, preseason magazine. Jim O'Brien, I believe, was the name of the editor. And Smith had Kentucky rated number 2 in the country in the preseason poll. So I thought, okay, I'll get a note out of that. What kind of reaction have you gotten from Kentucky fans? And he said, they're really mad. They're really upset. And I said, really? Why? He says, because we rated Kentucky so low.
We also get Jerry to settle the debate on who's the best Kentucky team of all time.
The thing about 96 was, I don't want to say the wrong words here, but it was kind of boring because they were so much better. A lot of the games were over at halftime.
It's time to start the show.
Jim, isn't it amazing when Michigan can keep this game to a 19-foot 9-inch game inside that three-point line? It's all theirs. Nice move by Steve Fisher here. Turn it into the 19.
All right, welcome to the 19-9 Podcast. I'm the Chucker, 19-9's resident historian, and today my co-host Aaron Meyer and I are going on press row with Jerry Tipton. Now, we've talked Kentucky hoops here before on the 19-9 Podcast with the likes of author Doug Brunk, as well as former Wildcat Aminu Timberlake, but we've never, ever talked about the Blue Blood program with anybody quite like Jerry Tipton. Tipton is now in his 40th year covering University of Kentucky men's basketball for the Lexington Herald-Leader. From Bowie to the Unforgettables, to the Brow and Boogie, from Eddie to Patino to Tubby to Calipari and everyone in between, Tipton has been there for it all over the last 4 decades. We're going to talk with the esteemed journalist about his 40-year run covering University of Kentucky basketball, the highs and the lows of a program that has seen its all since Tipton began covering it in 1981. In fact, a former editor once said of Tipton that if there was ever to be a Pulitzer Prize for sustained beat writing under miserable conditions, Tipton should earn the inaugural award. So we're thrilled to welcome Jerry Tipton, a member of the U.S. Basketball Writers Association Hall of Fame, to the 19-9 Podcast. Jerry, thanks for carving out some time for us here today.
My pleasure. Happy to do it.
Jerry, whenever you walk into the arena, you need to have the Chucker introduce you like that. I want an intro like that when I go into. I'm a school principal, so when I come in the morning, I just need that rolling on the PA for something that the Chucker carves up. I love that. Thanks.
I do try to do my best.
Yeah, this is my 41st season.
Oh yeah, see, he's editing.
And I don't think about that, and I'm a little embarrassed by it. I just think about the last 1 or 2 stories. And the next 1 or 2 stories. That's kind of the time frame that I work under.
So, 41 seasons. So, Jerry, I read you're a Detroit kid. You attended Marshall University. You wind your way to Lexington, working for the newspaper there. There is, let's call it, intense fandom for Kentucky basketball. So, of Big Blue Nation, you've said anything short of reverence is ridicule. So I want to get this sense, when you kind of go down to Lexington, what were your initial impressions of the program and Big Blue Nation and what it was all about?
Well, it was a learning process. I mean, I'd been to Lexington once, but I don't even know if that counts. And I'd covered Marshall for 2 years, Marshall basketball for the Huntington paper. And so I was, in my naivete, thought, well, it's like covering Marshall. So we traveled with the team. They went on bus to all the games. Of course, Kentucky's different. They flew to a lot of the games, and it was a complete learning experience from the start. And I've heard several coaches have said that you really don't know what you're getting into as the Kentucky coach until you're in the seat. And I think that applies to covering Kentucky.
Applies to the beat journalist as well, huh?
Right.
So With you, Jerry, there's a few specific topics I'd like to dive into before asking kind of some more open-ended questions, reflecting on your last 40 years covering the program. So let me begin here. In 1985, you published an article detailing $100 handshakes and NCAA violations. So I want to give us a sense of our listeners. Tell them how that article was received, because I think this kind of paints a picture for what Big Blue Nation is about in some respects.
Well, as you can imagine, as you chuckled, it wasn't received well. I mean, there's kind of a feeling of the way I think about it is the games are not supposed to be competitions. They're supposed to be demonstrations of Kentucky's superiority. And so anything that could hinder that demonstration is not welcome. And even though the newspaper thought they were just relating what was really going on, you know what I mean? It was kind of a look behind the scenes. There was no big secret to it. Everybody sort of knew, a wink and a nod. But it was just putting it out there, and the consequences of an possible NCAA probation or whatever did not make people happy. And at one point, people saw a hole in a window in the newspaper, and it was considered a bullet hole. I don't know if a bullet was ever found. And, there was talk about boycotting the paper and all of that. And I have a T-shirt in my closet. I never wear it, but it says, if we can't send the Herald Leader to Knoxville, let's send the editor to Baltimore. He was from Baltimore, John Carroll, a multiple Pulitzer Prize winning editor. Yeah. And ironically enough, the newspaper now is printed in Knoxville.
Really?
So there you go.
There you go. Finally got it there.
Right.
Well, coming out of that time period, that kind of low point from the 3-year probation, 1989, what did you foresee? Because I think these are such interesting inflection points for these blue blood programs, where to sustain success over the length of time that Kentucky's been able to do, there's always these ebbs and flows, but somehow they make it through those shaky points to come out and get to the top of the mountain again. So what did you see coming out of that probationary period?
Well, it was it was a disaster by Kentucky standards, and they had a losing record in Eddie Sutton's last year, and that was the first losing record since, I believe, 1927. And people were devastated. Kentucky basketball, it's more than sports. It's kind of a way of life. I think of it as a family heirloom, precious family heirloom that's passed from generation to generation. And I like to tell the story about, I don't know if you remember Street and Smith, preseason magazine. Jim O'Brien, I believe, was the name of the editor. And he, and I do a basketball notes column each Sunday.
Nice.
And anyway, so Street and Smith had Kentucky rated number 2 in the country in their preseason poll. So I thought, okay, I'll get a note out of that. So I called him and asked him, why is Kentucky number 2? And he said, oh yeah, we like their guards, we like their big guys, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm thinking, okay, what kind of reaction have you gotten from Kentucky fans? And he said, oh, they're really mad. They're really upset. And I said, really? Why? He says, because we rated Kentucky so low, number 2.
Yeah.
So that gives you an idea of what the standard is. And so within probation and everything was devastating. And it just made that following season, 89-90, Rick Pitino's first season, so amazing, because it was quite a transformation. It didn't last, because they went back to, how could you rank us so low, number 2, in short order. But for that first season or two, it was much more of a fun, enjoyable experience for the fans, instead of we have to assert dominance at all times.
And, Jerry, you mentioned Coach Pitino there. So he arrives in 1989. And it doesn't take long for that transformation to happen under his watch. And so they have an Elite 8 run in 1992 behind Jamal Mashburn and the Unforgettables. And there's a very famous loss to Duke in what some people call the greatest game ever played. you had a great seat for that. So I want you to take us back to the Spectrum in Philadelphia that day. I think for some college basketball fans that's one of those moments where I remember where I was when, and it's Christian Laettner hit the shot. So for you, take us back there. You were in the house that day, nearly 30 years later. What memories of that day, of that game, of that event stick with you here today?
Well, I like to tell people that covering Kentucky is, I feel fortunate to be doing that. And every once in a while, you feel like you're witnessing history. And that was one of those occasions. And of course, it was one of those things where I would relive it again and again and chastise myself because I'm constantly like reviewing and did the story. The story could have been better. I wish I had mentioned this or that. And one of the things was this was like the culmination of a 3-year rebuilding period. And I don't think I made enough of that in the story, the heartbreak involved. And of course, one of the things I remember clearly, and I was glad I noticed it, was Kentucky, they score with 2.1 seconds left. And then after a timeout, I believe, Duke inbounds, and Kentucky did not guard the inbounder, Grant Hill. And that became, for years, an avenue or an opportunity to second guess the coach. And of course, they throw long. Laettner makes the shot. And I was overwhelmed emotionally. I hate to use the word magnificence because Kentucky fans wouldn't see it that way. But that's the way it was. It was like almost awe-inspiring, the drama and how it ended. And that was, by the way, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Kaywood Ledford. He was the Kentucky radio play-by-play guy, a very iconic, living, breathing personification of the program. He did it for 39 years.
Wow.
That was his last game.
Wow.
He retired. And that's one of the things I remember. That's way up there because Mike Krzyzewski came over to Kaywood when the game ended and said something on the broadcast about just saluting Kentucky and how they played. But the thing I remember is Kaywood, who should be in every broadcasting Hall of Fame there is, he ended his broadcast by quoting John Greenleaf Whittier, who said that for all the sad words of tongue and pen, the saddest are these, it might have been.
Oh.
And I just thought that, if I could pick a way to end my career, I would want to end it with a poetic notion.
Jerry, I want to stick on that for just a moment. That game, you talk about the real dark days for Kentucky before that and the unforgettables, those seniors who stuck with the program, not knowing that we're not going to an NCAA tournament. We're not going to have the experience we thought we would have. And then in their senior year, Pelfrey, Woods, they get and I'm leaving some out. I know Richie Farmer, but those guys, they get there, they get the chance to do it. You had seen, it's hard, I think, as a journalist to, we have to park our fandom at the door, but you had covered those kids and you had had conversations with them. How did you feel for those 4 young men, the unforgettables as they are, and that their careers ended in that way?
Well, it was heartbreaking for them, no doubt about it, and for the state of Kentucky. And I second one of my other second guesses is I was just, like I say, blown away. So I just went to the post-game press conferences, the coach's formal press conference. I wish I'd gone to the locker room because I think that's where we had somebody else go there, so we had it covered. But I wish I had gone there. Looking back on it, I wasn't smart enough then. I would now. But that's where I think that a raw emotion showed itself. And, it was such a great game. And Duke was number 1, and they were, the defending national champion. It was set up to be one of the great moments in Kentucky basketball history, which obviously has had a lot. And it became, I would say, the most heartbreaking moment, certainly in my time.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, I still see people wearing a T-shirt with the words, "I still hate Leitner." So, it resonates.
We talked to Aminu Timberlake. We had a picture of him with that shirt on, and he couldn't figure out why
All
people
right.
wanted to come up and take a picture with him. But everybody wanted a picture of him with that shirt on.
Yeah, I always kind of feel like Kentucky fans feel like if you beat them, you should have a little remorse that you did it. But with Leitner,
No remorse, no
he
love
was
lost there.
much too happy about it.
It's, before Kentucky got that 2012 national title, you refer to the 96 Wildcats as the greatest UK team you ever covered. So I got to get you on the record here between those two, because I think, for me as a kind of a just college basketball fan, those two would be up there in all-time college basketball teams. But it would be a fun debate between Kentucky fans, which one you liked more.
It's probably a generational thing where if you're of a
maybe.
certain age,
Yeah.
96, younger, 2000, it'd be a great game to cover. Certainly a lot of great players on both sides. The thing about 96 was, I don't want to say the wrong words here, but it was kind of boring because they were so much better. A lot of the games were over at halftime.
Yeah.
And I sort of like, it's much easier to write about drama than it is dominance. And, that's the way they were. There were a couple of games where, they weren't dominant every game, but they were just so good. And the 2012 team was too, no doubt. It would be hard to pick, really.
I felt like the 96, I'm a little bit older, so I think that 96 squad for me is just, because of the depth was just so incredible. Like it just kept coming at you. And then I love that pressing style. I mean, that's a little fallen out of fashion a little bit now, but it was so much fun to just watch how relentless that was when you had a full team, when you're bringing, guys off the bench who are starters on any other team, and they're bought in that way to play that intense style.
That's funny you mentioned the style, because that played a big part in Rick Pitino just transforming Kentucky. That first year, the fans had been grumbling about Eddie Sutton's style. And of course, they're always grumbling about something, by the way.
Yeah.
But then they come in and they're pressing full court and they're shooting threes. The fans love the threes. There's constant action. And it had people on the edge of their seats. And even though they were just 14-14 that first season, people were thrilled that, they were so entertaining. And at least for that one and the second season to a lesser degree, just being entertained was enough. And that was kind of fun. It was a nice contrast.
You said Eddie Sutton again. I don't know who it was that told us, but someone told us that he knew he wouldn't be at Kentucky for very long because he didn't get as many season tickets to hand out as some of the other coaches. Well, I don't know if you ever heard that story before, but no, I got a kick out of that.
That sounds like something where a coach is trying to be humorous. There was a question about Joe B. Hall in his final years and about whether he bartered tickets for profit. But when Eddie Sutton came along, no, I mean, it was more the losing. It was more the NCAA probation. The thing fell apart, really. Yeah. And, it was just, it wasn't much fun.
Yeah, coach looking for cover, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to be funny, I guess.
Yeah.
And, Jerry, I want to stick on the topic of coaches. You mentioned Joe B. Hall, Coach Cal. We've talked about Pitino. You got Tubby Smith in there, too. You got a short Billy Gillispie run. These are some big personalities, some big storylines. I'm curious, over that, 44-decade-long career you've had, of those coaches, who did you find kind of the most interesting or compelling to cover? Understanding, of course, you still got to cover Coach Cal. So who did you find kind of compelling and interesting?
Well, the interesting thing to me is that covering it 41 seasons now, the coaching changes it becomes a new beat with the coach. When there's a coaching change, it's a refreshing thing. And I've always felt like that if the reporter is doing his or her job and the coach is doing his or her job, there's going to be moments of friction. And it's just the way it is. And so I always tried to find something about the coach that I like or admire so that when those moments of friction come, I have that as a kind of a foundation. I'm not like thinking, boy, that guy's what a jerk, that sort of thing. And with Joe B, he was from Kentucky, and it was kind of charming that he revered the program in the same way that the fans did. He had been a fan like that. And Eddie Sutton he had a charm about him, and he'd been a successful coach at Arkansas. And then Rick Pitino, just that transformation, and he radiated an intelligence that was appealing. My favorite story about Tubby Smith. He came from Georgia. He was the Georgia coach, and Georgia hired his number one assistant to replace him, Ron Jerza. So, and this was either the first or second year at Kentucky, and Georgia fans were already unhappy with Jerza. And so Kentucky goes down there to play, and the game goes into overtime. Great game. And Georgia decides to change defenses going into overtime. Kentucky seizes on that, pulls away, and wins. So in the post-game press conference, and Tubby Smith he's sensitive about his guy as the coach and being under fire. Well, a reporter for the Georgia student paper, he's nervous, and he asked Tubby something to the effect of, boy, Jerza really screwed up, didn't he, when he changed defenses? Well, Tubby doesn't like hearing this. And he snaps at the student reporter and said something like, what team have you ever coached? And so then we go to the next question, and he's answering it. Tubby Smith's answering it, but you can tell he's distracted. You can tell something's on his mind. And at the end of his response, he turns back to the student reporter and apologizes and says he didn't answer his question properly. Ask it again. And I was very impressed by that, especially from a coach.
Wow.
From an autocratic coach.
That's pretty impressive.
Yes.
Better than Coach K did with the student newspaper reporter.
I was impressed by that. And, it's not hard to find something about each of the coaches that you like and you can kind of fall back on when moments of friction happen.
I got to get your perspective on Coach Calipari. He had this embrace the one and done era, I think, in a way that no other coach did, and kind of started to define the era. But when you started, guys were staying 4 years, and it started to pare down to 3-2, and then it came to that one and done. So how did that change the dynamic, and how did it change how you covered basketball too? Because just to develop the stories, you don't have the guys that the unforgettables like the Chucker was talking about if they're only there a year.
Right. Well, it's a different way of going about it. It's an evolving process, sort of like the internet has revolutionized, and now the one and done, the transfer portal.
Yeah.
It's almost more like a pickup game, almost. Where each season, I think it's going to be that way.
Yeah.
Where they're going to have it's going to be a new team, and we're sort of used to that to some degree at Kentucky. I still hear fans they lament that it's not the way it was. They much prefer the getting to know the players and bonding with them. And they think, the fans now, Kentucky can be perceived as more of a way station to the NBA. That's kind of the selling point. They hardly ever miss a chance to link Kentucky to the NBA. And for the fans, they see Kentucky as a destination, something that you're privileged to play for Kentucky. And, it's just not, it doesn't translate that way. So it's an adjustment. I tell the fans, I'm like you, especially early in a season, I'm trying to get to know the players too, by sight, and learn their games. I don't cover recruiting, and just try to get a sense of them. And it's, it's just part of the process, and you deal with it.
Jerry, we've talked a lot here about Kentucky basketball, and I just want to pause the talk of the Wildcats for just a moment and ask you about something else you covered in Lexington, and that's the 1985 national title game in which Villanova upset Georgetown. I confess, the Chucker, an immense fascination with that game. The Villanova, the Georgetown, the storylines, the Big East rivals, Georgetown being the dominant force. No shot clock, all these, the gamesmanship in it. What memories of that experience in that game stick with you here today?
Well, there's two things, and I hope I don't sound like I'm bragging on myself, but I liked my lead to the story. I was moved back then when I was younger. I wanted to be inspired by what I saw. Now, as I've gotten older, I do more prep just in case. I don't want to be sitting there and like, oh no. And plus, I have to rush now. But anyway, my lead was Villanova plays this great game. They were sort of the Cinderella, and
Absolutely.
Georgetown was big and bad and all that intimidating. My lead was Snowball 1, Hell Nothing. And and I liked that if
Yep.
nobody else did. And the other thing I remember, and I think this was at the Final Four, back then, you could get right up there with the coach in the pregame and the day before interview stuff. And John Thompson was an intimidating presence, as we know. And I remember I grew up a Celtic fan, even though I grew up in Detroit. And I knew he played for the Celtics. And somehow I mentioned Red Auerbach to him. And his whole his everything sort of softened, and this nice warm smile. And that made me, I liked Auerbach. I really liked Auerbach. And that made me feel good. I got the sense that his time with Boston really meant something to him.
Yeah. He loved his time in Boston. From his autobiography, he talks really fondly of
I need to read
his
that.
time there. Yeah, it's an excellent book. So as a journalist, you're supposed to park that fandom, especially as the beat writer. You got to just cover it without having a fan. But is there a player from your time that you enjoyed covering? Maybe you're not rooting for them in that sort of fandom way, but just the personality stood out, or you just enjoyed covering their time at Kentucky.
Yes, of course. And I do keep the rooting to the side. Growing up in Detroit, I was in Big Ten country, and it took me, Kentucky, I grew to appreciate what Kentucky basketball is, but I don't have that, that tie-in over generations. I leave the winning to the coaches and the players, and I root for a good story idea. But anyway, the guy that immediately comes to mind is Tyler Eulis. He was so good. His assist to turnover ratio was like 4-1. But and he had that David and Goliath thing going, the little guy, and I find that hard to resist. And the first thing I remember about him was they played in the Bahamas, a series of exhibition games before his freshman year. So he had not played a college game yet. And I noticed right away that he was the smartest player on the court. And they would throw the outlet pass to him, and he would be throwing touch passes up ahead to teammates running the break. And I was just like, I was blown away by this. And I just found he was, as you guys know, very competitive. And other teams would try to post him up, and he wasn't having it. You know what I mean? He was going to compete for that place in the low post. They weren't going to just post him. And I liked him. Another guy is, and this is more on a personal level, Eric Daniels. He played center, undersized. He may have been 6'7", maybe 6'8", but he was very crafty, and like Tyler Eulis, except as a big. And I remember he used arm fakes. He would use an arm fake, and and the opponents would fall for it. And I thought that was kind of charming.
Yeah,
that he could do that.
Very YMCA of him.
Yes. Yeah. He was
somewhere. Eric Daniels is dominating a rec league.
That's right.
He still lives in our area, and nice guy.
That's great.
And a fun guy to watch play.
I think Eric.
Yeah, I can't like Eulis as a Kentucky player since I'm an IU fan, but I loved he made it to the NBA and had kind of a cup of coffee there and just was fun to root with. One of those guys that, man, if he had been just a little bit taller, would have been a fantastic NBA player too, but lightning quick and like you said, team player, which is always helps make the game more exciting.
Well, John Calipari's had a string of very good point guards.
No doubt.
Yeah. But Eulis, if you compare the numbers, Eulis is just, he's way ahead of the rest of them, in assist to turnover. And I would say, I mean, they were all very good. It's not that. But he was just, to me, a cut above.
Yeah. I think Aaron asked a great question there about a player you rooted for. And I want to take it just kind of tap into that memory bank a little bit on something else. And, we talked about the 1992 game against Duke in the NCAA tournament, the shot or the stomp, depending on what side of the spectrum you're on. But let's put that game aside. And I'm curious about, for you, what's the most memorable Kentucky game you've covered over the last 4 decades?
Well, if you're asking me to pick one game, I would pick they played Louisville in the 1983 NCAA tournament in Knoxville, of all places. And Louisville had been lobbying for a regular season series. They had won national championships by then. They were, or at least won, 1980, I believe. So they felt like they were, if not on par with Kentucky, it would be an entertaining game. Well, Kentucky was having none of it, and they were, I think they saw it as they had nothing to gain from it. Louisville would take another step forwards towards parity, which was, a gross insult for Kentucky standards, and so they were supposed to play in '82 in the tournament, except Kentucky lost to Middle Tennessee in the game before. The winner was going to play Louisville. Louisville had a bye, which was another insult, by the way. So '83 comes along. They get paired. They're going to, if they both advance, which they did, they're going to play in the region finals. Final four on the line. And it was just to see the two teams on the court warming up. And they hadn't played since 1959 NCAA tournament. So just to see, it was like seeing the Israelis and the Palestinians on the same court. It's like, what? Is this even allowed? Yeah. And so they play. The game goes into overtime, super game. And that one comes to mind immediately. And it led to them starting a regular season series. The game was so good that the talk was the state legislature was going to pass a law mandating the series unless Kentucky agreed to it. So they did.
I can get on board with that law.
Yeah.
Connects the Blues and the Reds together.
But there's literally all sorts of games. There's been all sorts, not all sorts, but there's been a lot of games. Another one is the Mardi Gras Miracle at LSU.
Oh, yeah.
In 95, I believe. Kentucky was down 31 in the second half. And Pitino had given up because he was very animated as a coach on the sideline. But he was just sitting there with his legs crossed, arms crossed, almost pouting. And they start this comeback. And the sports media at the time covering Kentucky, they had this gesture. We had this gesture where you would slap your palm down on the table to indicate close the book, the game's over. And so everybody else covering Kentucky had put their palms down, and they were looking at me, and I said no, I wasn't going to do it because of the three-pointer, not because I'm so smart. But if you hit 3 or 4 threes quickly, which Pitino teams could do, the whole tenor of the game could change dramatically. Well, that's what happened. And they come back and win. Crazy. So I think it's still the biggest comeback victory, second half comeback victory in NCAA tournament, NCAA basketball history.
Wow.
I think.
Still remember watching the game myself. The Mardi Gras Miracle.
It's a great game.
You brought up something I wanted to hit on. You talked about I want to get into this relationship between Louisville and Kentucky. And what was it like when you started, which seems like it was very contentious and like, hey, UK's up here, Louisville, you're down here. How has that evolved over the years, or is it still the same?
Well, I think there's no, it's not the same. I mean, there's sort of,
I guess, how do you describe to outsiders the relationship between those two those two very well-respected programs?
Yeah, well, there's still, it's not like it was where Kentucky was not going to even acknowledge Louisville. That would have been a great concession to make. They weren't going to do that. But eventually now they're sort of they're still rivals. And, very hot rivals. They would see it as the best rivalry in college basketball. I don't know. We can debate that. But you got to throw in the big city, Louisville, the countryside. That's an element in it. There might be a racial angle. Louisville has a large black population, and you could that was part of it back in the day.
Yeah.
But I think there's sort of, I don't know if respect might be overstating it, from Kentucky to Louisville. And Louisville feels like they're being looked down upon, the fans, I think.
Interesting.
Nobody likes that, of course. But they can be on the same court. It's not a shocking, we've conditioned ourselves to see that. But it's always a game that everybody looks forward to.
Speaking of not liking to be looked down on, how do we? You got a line to Calipari. How do we fire up that IU Kentucky rivalry again? Because I missed that. I gotta admit, I missed that. It's not like IU's been a blue blood lately, but certainly college basketball with all the realignment and things that have happened could use some rivalries again. I think those are just fun for fans, even casual fans. And I think with Woodson back in there and his history and Calipari just having general history in the NCAA, I would love to see that reemerge.
Calipari was asked about that. I believe it was after they played Ohio, and he talked about how much he likes Mike Woodson. And he didn't say they talked about the series resuming, but he did say they've talked, but he didn't go any further than that. And that last Kentucky-Indiana game was the game where Christian Watford made the last second.
Yeah.
That was on my list of memorable games, because the fans charged the court, and the student section was right behind the media where we were, behind the baseline. And that's the scariest I've ever been, because they were charging, and I was protecting my computer in front of me, kind of bracing myself, and they were pressing up against me. I didn't know if I could hold it, but I did, fortunately. But, that was, there was a real hostility from Indiana fans directed at Kentucky, and I don't know if Calipari, I'm sure he didn't like that. Some of it was directed at him.
Yeah.
And maybe that contributed also to the ending.
He got us in the tournament, though, that year, so he can't be that mad.
They were for neutral sites. Kentucky said they would continue, but only neutral sites, Louisville and Indianapolis. And Indiana wanted home and home. Yeah. And so they couldn't agree.
The game's not the same in Indianapolis versus Assembly Hall or Rupp Arena. It just isn't.
No. Yeah.
So Jerry, I know you got to go. You've been gracious with your time here. I wanted to ask one last question, and that's, you've been in SEC country all these years, and there's a rich basketball history in the Southeast. When you think about LSU and Pistol Pete, and you think about Dominique at Georgia, and obviously Kentucky, Florida with recent national titles, and there's some great Arkansas, of course. Yeah, I'm certainly leaving some out, but it's football country down there. Let's be honest. Has basketball closed that gap at all, or has football become even a more powerful force? Because Aaron mentioned conference realignment. That's really driven by football. So how do you kind of see that dynamic there? Because there's a rich history, but there's also been some SEC I think has become more and more competitive over the years on the national stage, and deeper really. And so how do you kind of see that?
Well, I think the SEC has made it a priority to elevate basketball, the profile nationally. And a game that comes to mind, and I don't remember what year, but it was fairly recently, Kentucky played Tennessee in the SEC tournament finals in Nashville. And the crowd was 50-50. Usually at the SEC tournament, it would be Kentucky, 80, 90%. This time it was kind of 50-50. And every basket, almost every play, I'm exaggerating a little, drew a roar from one half of the crowd. And it was a fun atmosphere. They may have closed the gap somewhat, but football is football. Let's be honest.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and nobody is gunning to bring down football.
Yeah. Would you say basketball's got to be the snowball here if they're going to take anybody down?
Right, yeah. But I remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, the SEC was good. I don't know if it was appreciated as much, but every team had one or two guys that were Kentucky good, that could play for Kentucky. And I think we're going to return to that at some point. And Arkansas joining made a real difference. I think that's kind of gave the rest of the league someone other than Kentucky to kind of be a model. And then Florida, what Florida did. And that
Alabama.
profile, that national TV. But I think basketball, maybe, I don't know, maybe is more of a thing now than it was decades back. And the SEC wants to ride that too.
And, well, Jerry, you're going to have to get ready for those trips to Austin, Texas, and Norman, Oklahoma soon too. So Jerry, we're going to end it there. We want to thank you for sharing your time with the 99 podcast and really giving us a rich look into Kentucky hoops. I know we certainly appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate being on, guys, and send me whatever you put out. I'd like to hear it.
All right. Thank you for listening to the 99 podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do. And while you're at it, leave us a rating or review. 5 stars only, like the basketball camp. We also have links to all of 99 social media so you never miss a release. Until next time,